I like your backdrop. It looks wonderful.
Thank you, Jan. Good to know that the beaches will remain open in the county here.
Yeah, just Orange County was the only one he closed?
Correct.
So you can keep your 4 beaches open? Is that what you're... So we're starting in this one and then we'll go closed session? Is that what we
Yeah, and I think we just as a note for our next meeting, we've identified a way that it might be able to happen all within the same meeting. It's a little bit of a process. There's these breakout room sessions that we can set up, but we're going to have to try all that without this large group beforehand. We couldn't get it together for today. So for the next one, I think we'll have this very polished by June 30th. So
Yeah.
anybody looking for a great remote working team, you know where to find us.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's a little bit after 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority for April 30th, 2020. And our first order of business is to go into closed session. So maybe council, if you would alert the public as to what we'll be discussing in closed session, and then we can recess to that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the board and public, we will be adjourning to closed session. There's one item on the agenda: conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9 D2. Anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation. There are 2 potential cases.
Great, thank you. Before we recess to closed session, I do want to ask if there's any public comment. So if you are participating in the Zoom meeting and you want to make a comment on closed session items, please raise your hand. All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so we will recess to closed session and reconvene in open session as soon as we can.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah, that's Michael.
How you been?
Still pumping.
Hey, nice to see you.
Looks like you got great weather for sitting around. Good for you.
It's great in the backyard today.
Well, I'm not actually in San Francisco. It's false advertising here.
We should have a vote on who's got the best background.
I think
Michael wins.
Mary Ann looks pretty nice with Hawaii in the background.
You'd have to have categories for real and otherwise.
So mine's actually a real picture from Santa Cruz North. It looks fake, but it's real photograph.
Mine is Dawn over Monterey.
Like it.
Jonathan was putting up the Bay Bridge earlier.
Hey, Michael. You're up. There you are.
Hey, John
I don't
Giffen,
know.
how are
I
you?
think I might be up. I'm good. How are you? Are we? I think Are we on the right channel?
This is the right channel.
Yeah. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Michael Hulamard, hello, Frank O'Connell.
Frank, how are you? I
I'm
saw your
fine,
name
how are
on.
you?
Not coming through very clear.
Fine, how are you?
I'm well. I
Not
was
coming through at all.
thinking about you this week with Edith
Oh,
and so forth.
Right.
Well, my Red Sox are still in first place.
They may be for a while.
Take care.
All right, so have we regained the lion's share of our board members?
Two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm seeing 9, 10, 11. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, in that case, then I'm going to reconvene the special meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board of Directors for April 30th, 2020. And Council, would you announce any action taken in closed session?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board, and public. The board did meet in closed session on item 2A, which involved 2 matters of anticipated litigation, and there's nothing to report out.
Thank you. As we move into announcements and correspondence, I will just note that we have a proposed proclamation in honor of Edith Johnson that I would like to ask the board's indulgence to add to the agenda today. So I would entertain a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Phillips.
Great, thank you. Phillips made the motion, Carbone seconded it. Is there any discussion? Any public comment on whether we should add this to the agenda? Okay, thank you. Not seeing any, then Mr. Tregenza, would you administer a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams, Supervisor Jon Phillips,
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
Yes.
Councilmember Alan Haffa,
Here.
Councilmember Jon Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti, Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Yes.
Mayor Mary Ann Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We will we'll add it to the agenda, I think, towards the end, so that we can move through our existing agenda first. So thank you for being willing to add that to the agenda. And next, then, Mr. Metz, are there any acknowledgements, announcements, or correspondence you'd like to share with the board?
Sure. And that you've covered the acknowledgement of Edith and adding that to the agenda. that was going to be one, but also to begin today's meeting with some good news of national significance. The Fort Ord redevelopment process was recognized by the U.S. EPA today as a National Federal Facility Excellence in Site Reuse Award. The award recognizes innovative thinking and cooperation among federal agencies, states, tribes, local partners, and developers that have led to noteworthy restoration and reuse of federal facilities, Superfund sites. So I think this is, this is the 50th year of the EPA. It's a strong acknowledgement of the work by many dedicated professionals, many on this call, including your retired executive officer, but certainly Stan Cook and Laura Vidori, Bill Collins at the BRAC office, and many others that have been involved in this cleanup effort that have kind of laid the foundation for the economic reuse that's happening here. So that is quite noteworthy. There's a number of press releases out. We'll be sending one out shortly after this meeting to all local media, including some nice quotes from Congressman Panetta and others. And I think that's just something worth acknowledging and announcing here. Secondly, while we have made a little bit of a custom of acknowledging noteworthy actions in regard to the coronavirus pandemic, something caught my eye last week, which I wanted to highlight here, which is the public-private partnership that emerged between Joby Aviation, the city of Marina, and the county, whereby Joby's soon-to-be completed 50,000 square foot air aviation tent going up at the Marina Airport to be the site of their prototype manufacturing line is being set up as an alternate site for COVID patient care if needed. And I think that's providing, of course, a nice buffer for the county if that space becomes needed, and also allows for that important job generating project to move ahead even under these circumstances that we're in. So I thought that was worth noting. And then finally, we had a call yesterday with our group of HCP EIR consultants, and just to keep this on the radar, that progress is being made towards that board directed activity of completion of the EIR. There was, I just wanted to mention that I think it was, I can't say if it was our last meeting or the one before that, but we included in the packet a draft letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which we discussed, but saved for later action. Just a reminder that if anyone has input on that letter, please send those comments to us. So with that, I'd close the acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence piece, unless I'm forgetting any correspondence. Harry, did I forget any correspondence that should be noted here?
No.
Okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. And next item is roll call. I guess I do just want to, many people have made note of the fact that our retired executive officer is with us in this meeting. So I just want to say welcome to you, Michael. Really
Indeed.
Good to see you. And then Mr. Tregenza, if you would establish our quorum and call the roll.
Sure. Supervisor Jane Parker.
Here.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Here.
Supervisor Mary Adams. Councilmember John Gaglioti. Councilmember Frank O'Connell.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Here.
Councilmember Alan Haffa.
Here.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Here.
Councilmember Jon Wizard.
Here.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Here.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Here.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield,
Here.
Councilmember Jan Reimers,
Here.
Katie Moon, Colleen Courtney,
Colleen isn't, but Toby obtained via from Senator Bill Mines' office is on.
thank you. Erica Parker, Debbie Hale,
Here.
Dr. PK Diffenbaugh, Steve Matarazzo, Dr. Eduardo Ochoa, Colonel Gregory Ford.
Here. I'm here.
Thank you. Bill Collins,
Here.
David Martin,
Here.
Lisa Reinheimer, and Keith Vandermotten. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We'll move now to the consent calendar. There are two items, both of them minutes, one from March 12th, 2020, and one set from December 13th, 2019. Are there any members of the board who have questions or comments on the consent items? If you would raise your hand in the Zoom bot, that would be great. Seeing none, any members of the public with questions or comments on the minutes? I'm seeing no hands being raised, so I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I saw Janet Reimers had her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Just to clarify, I did attend the March meeting, and Harry already has added that to the minutes to correct it. Just information. Thank you.
An important piece of information. Good. Thank you. And sorry I didn't see your hand. All right. With that, then I would entertain a motion to adopt those meeting minutes with the correction mentioned.
So moved, Phillips.
Thank you.
Second by Oglesby.
Thank you. Motion by Phillips, second by Oglesby. Any discussion? If not, then Mr. Tregenza, if you would do a roll call vote for us.
Sure. Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell.
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Haffa.
Aye.
Councilmember Jon Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter.
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We can move then to our business items. Agenda item 7, and the first one, 7A, is building removal bond funding agreements. So
Yeah, so I'll lead off this item. I'll probably call on our able municipal advisor, Mark Northcross, who I can say has been a real leader in helping us get to where we are on all of this. So the board report describes what we have before us today, primarily focused on the 6 funding agreements that are set up between FORA and the City of Marina in its capacity as an administrator for the bond, and each individual entity that would receive bond proceeds. They contain provisions to address a series of primary issues focusing the use of the bonds on building removal costs, controls in the expenditure of the bond proceeds, issues about responsibility and liability, and the termination of those agreements once the bond proceeds are spent. So they're provided here for reference, and there's a single authorizing resolution that we're looking for board action on today. And with that, I would say, Mark, do you have anything else to add to that overview? You're on mute, Mark. You're talking.
Now I got it. Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Documents are really intended to reflect all the direction we have from the FORA stakeholders, which was that once you receive your money under the allocation as approved by the board, it's your money. You spend it as you choose, so long as for building removal. That's what we're in the business of doing. Your only obligation once you get the money is to spend it and to keep records of how you spend it. So we make sure we're all comfortable that got spent on building removal. And then also there's provisions in there to make sure that neither the authority nor the administrator, City of Marina, have any responsibilities for any of that. So that was the direction we got, and that's the agreement we hope we presented to you.
Thank you. Any board member questions? Please raise your hand and I'll call on you. I see Cynthia Garfield's hand in the screen. Go ahead.
And on the little clicky thing. Yeah, so I have a series of questions that I think are just small little issues. They're not big issues. So let me just walk through these just for clarifications. On page 18 of 155, you refer to the date of issuance. Is that one moment in time, or does money come in over a period of time as it's sold?
The date of issuance is the date we close the bond issue, God willing. That's presumably going to be in early June. And so it's a firm date. We'll have a closing call in the morning on a conference call, and you're all welcome to be on it. And it takes about 10 minutes and we close. And as I said, God willing, that's it.
Perfect.
Next thing that happens, a trustee wires the money to the 6 stakeholders under the funding agreements.
I saw that it was a wire transfer, and I think that's very tidy. That was nice to see in there. Couple of other questions are at some point on page 19, it refers to what happens if an entity, a jurisdiction determines that the funds they have on hand will not be used for building removal. Is there a moment in time where you say, okay, it's 20 years from now and you haven't used the money? Is there a fish or cut bait date?
No, it's again, it's sole discretion of the funding agreement stakeholder, and they don't have to do that because it's a taxable bond issue. There's no U.S. Treasury restrictions on how long you sit on the money. The only restriction is that it's for building removal, you know, as defined by FORA's authorizing statute and everything else we have. So if you change your mind and you say, I want to build a new road over here. Sorry, you can't do that. But if there's a old barracks sitting where you want to build a road, yeah, you can remediate that barracks.
Okay, I appreciate the definitions of what remediation meant, so that was very helpful as well. But to that point, you've got an entity has a bunch of money, and particularly in this time in our lives, can that money ever be borrowed by the entity to be used for another purpose?
No, there's
okay.
No, it's strict. I mean, it doesn't, you know, to be really blunt and transparent, I'm aware of things in my career over the last pushing 40 years where issuers have done things like that. They've gotten in big trouble. Not a good thing. No, it says spend it. You control this money totally as long as you spend it on building removal.
And keep records.
And keep records of it, yeah.
Good. And then I put on my suspicion hat for this particular one. And page 20 of 155, it says this agreement may be amended by the participants at some point. What prevents Delray Oaks and Marina as the administrator from amending this agreement?
In this case, the way it might come out is Marina and Delray Oaks, not to pick on two of your stakeholders.
I get that, but we have to name somebody.
Yeah, Delray Oaks has a remediation project we never knew about. They discovered something, and Marina Lane, is being the kind of generous guy he is, decides, well, I got extra money, so I'm gonna, put some of my building remediation money into Delray Oaks mystery remediation project we never knew existed. But again, it's got to be building removal. That's just runs through the documents. We've heard that, and this is where the money.
It has to be within the box. Okay. Yeah. And lastly, Marina's agreement has a number 16 on prepayment of bonds. Why is that the only one that has the issue of not prepayment of bonds?
Seaside, I believe, has one in there as well. And the county doesn't have one because it's the East Garrison DDA is what controls how long their project area stays in existence. And that's not a bond issue, it's a debt obligation, but it doesn't work like bonds. It's extremely remote, but we want to make sure, because this is how the bond business works, that since Marina and Seaside have bonds outstanding, and they could, in theory, legally refinance those bonds with a shorter amortization. I do not believe it's to their advantage in any way to do that. And I know Lane's on the call. I don't know if Craig's on. That they don't do that. And so, to my knowledge, Marina and Seaside are comfortable with that because, for all other reasons, you on successor agency debt, you just don't refi it to make it shorter. You wish you could refi it to make it longer, but the state of California won't allow you to do that.
Okay, thank you. I didn't catch that Seaside had it in there as well, so I appreciate the information. That's the extent of my questions on these documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members? I see Gail Morton's hand is raised. Yes, please go ahead.
So today's action, Mark, is asking us to approve these items A through H. But in the staff report, the question that gets raised at page 14 was that FORA's finance team intends to bring the final version of the indenture back to the board May 14th after we get through the CalPERS. I'm questioning why we're approving drafts of agreements if we don't have all of the terms worked out. Or are you asking that these are approved because whatever sum goes to these entities, this is what's going to be the structure of what's obligated to do with those funds? Can you clarify why we aren't?
That's a great question.
The cart is before the horse.
Yeah, no, normally you like to bring everything all at once. That would be the official statement, the disclosure document, the bond indenture, all the side agreements, bring it to your board in one fell swoop. In the case of FORA, one reason that to stage it is that it's quite the stack. This is a complex transaction, and we feel it's good to get let the board kind of take this in bites, and there's a way, and it's reasonable to take the funding agreements now. Another issue is that to do the validation, so we could even have the opportunity to issue bonds, we had to approve the indenture subject to non-substantive changes with respect to the validation in December. So we did that. But, you know, we are not tweaking anything in the indenture that goes to the validation issues, which is your right to receive tax increment and spend it on the bonds. But we're tweaking in other things that are not related to the validation. And so what we want to do is bring it back to the board, go through all the other tweaks, and then have you ratify it. So we think that's respectful, and it's just good public policy. So we got to come back, and we aren't really going to be ready to come back with all the tweaks to the indenture until we've got a rating from Standard & Poor's and hopefully a commitment from one or more of the bond insurers. So when we bring it back, we're bringing back, this is it. So the funding agreements, you notice that the allocation, that's the all-important piece that we've all been working on for months, frankly, I think going back years, is not in the funding agreements. It's in the resolution authorizing the funding agreements. We don't think the funding agreements are going to change. Like I said, we think the funding agreements, this is what the stakeholders have asked for. If it's not, slap our paw and let us know. But, you know, again, just being, you know, respectful to the FORA process and the fact that things change and there's surprises, you can amend the allocation without amending the funding agreements because that allocation is in your authorizing resolution you're considering. We think the allocations in there reflect the last board action on that. Look, if they not, you know, like, shame on us, but we think they do. So, Council member or board member Morton, what could happen is we want you to do is to really approve the funding agreements. We think it is what everyone wanted. On May 14th, you're going to be presented with the full package, God willing, everything, you know, whether it's CalPERS, bond insurance, rating, everything comes back, all the tweaks to the indenture. We're going to go through the whole thing. You're going to have a bond disclosure document, the official statement draft in front of you as well, which is another big deal. And if there's anything that has arisen that causes, I mean, again, God forbid, a reconsideration of the allocations by stakeholders, you can change it at that meeting, okay? And you don't have to go back and amend the funding agreements. They follow whatever that resolution was. So I'm playing lawyer here, but had good coaching on it, and I hope that answers your question.
If I may just ask a follow-up then, to be sure that I'm understanding, if Marina's share of the money is 10 million, 15 million, or 20 million because of the allocations that will be decided based on claims that are now arising, is that this document is only controlling whatever portion Marina gets, that this is how you're going to account for it, what you're going to use it for.
Bingo.
Correct?
Bingo, you got it.
And then secondarily, by approving these documents, we are not in any way voting to deviate from 100% of the proceeds going towards blight removal.
Yes, you are not.
That is not a silent, go ahead, yeah. Go ahead, and then.
Yeah, that's a completely question. We're jumping ahead to CalPERS, and Josh may want to bring you up to date, and something else has come up. Those decisions are not part of this action. We are assuming, God willing, I'm using that phrase a lot because of the intense thing. On May 14th, all that's resolved. And so we're bringing you, Board Member Morton, a complete package on May 14th that lays everything out and exactly what's going. And for some reason we're not ready on the 14th, I'm looking at Josh and Jon and Jane Parker here and saying we're going to come back and say, well, we don't want a special meeting after the 14th. And I guess my excuse on that, I'm seeing the advantages of virtual meetings. It's a lot easier to get your electeds to do a special meeting when they go on Zoom than when they have to drive an hour to get there. So.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure that by supporting this action, we were not acquiescing inadvertently by omission to modifications or acknowledging funds may be used for other purposes. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, we get the full sensitivity of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Good questions. Any other board members with questions before I open it up to the public? I'm not seeing any hands, so I will ask if there's any public comment on this item. Please raise your hand in the Zoom. And I'm not seeing any hands. Harry or Josh seeing hands? Sometimes I miss them. Okay, then I'll bring it back to this board. I think we can have discussion, or I would entertain a motion to take the action that's recommended and approve the resolution.
Oglesby approve the resolution.
Brown seconding the resolution.
Thank you. Motion by Oglesby, second by Carbone. Any discussion? Please raise your hands. Seeing no hands raised, Mr. Tregenza, would you give us a roll call vote, please?
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
Aye.
Member Frank O'Connell,
Aye.
Council Member Alan Haffa,
Aye.
Council Member Jon Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Aye.
Council Member Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Council Member John Gaglioti, Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Aye.
Mayor Mary Ann Carbone,
Aye.
Council Member Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, Harry, did you hear John Gagliotti's participation there? Because I didn't hear it.
He messaged me after roll call that he's here, and I see him here, but I didn't hear him vote. So,
John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You guys can't hear me. I think maybe I'm muted.
Okay. You want to weigh in?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I voted aye.
oh, sorry, we didn't hear you when you voted, but
Great. Thank you.
thank you.
Great. Thank you. Great. We will move now to item 7B. This is has to do with the CalPERS liability.
Okay. This is a fun one. Yeah. So, who here is familiar with CalPERS? Yeah, I'm going to assume most of you all. So, we have been working to, and you all actually have been working hard for years, and certainly in the last months to fully fund this Section 115 trust that would provide for the complete payment of expected CalPERS unfunded liability to the tune of about $8.5 million. And indeed, that is in place. What we've learned from our friends at CalPERS is the number's gone up. And so it's become an important issue to address in order for the bond issue to be able to proceed. And just for stepping back just a moment, this item's an information item today, and really is intended to provide that information and provide for discussion and action at a future meeting. But in order to address the potential gap of up to $2 million as of our last indication from the CalPERS folks, we've been able to benefit from the extensive and deep and broad experience of Mark Northcross and our bond counsel team, Quentin and Timig, who have been able to put forward a potential solution that has to do with classifying a portion of the bond issue as pension obligation bonds. But rather than pretend like I'm the guy with all the information while you have these Mark on the line, I would pass it off to him. And I would also mention that we have, in coordination with Mark and the team, we have engaged a pension fund actuarial expert who is on the call, Kathy McLeod out of Portland, and she will is brought on to help us get a very fine point on what we would expect from a final CalPERS liability. So I think Mark would lead off next and filling in where I know we have a presentation that's part of the board packet that Mark probably wants to step you through, and then bring in Kathy as needed to fill in any additional gaps. Does that work for you, Mark?
That works. Yeah, I don't need to go through the full slide deck. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it, but
Okay.
if you've got it in front of you, or the able Harry can do a screen share, it's, I like to take you to page 9 in the slide deck, which is where my sample example of how the quant might work is, and knowing how the FORA team is focused on how much money they're going to get. Let's go to the quant and let's look at an example of how this thing would work.
Okay, I think I'll be able to share my screen here. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the table in there on page 9. I'd like just to take us there.
Let's see if I'm going to
Skip
get
the rest of
lucky
it.
and get the right one. Is this the one you're talking about here, Mark?
Yeah. No, there's another one. There's a couple
Next
more.
steps. Okay, that's the only one I have. So maybe I'm missing. This is in our packet.
Slide 9.
I don't have.
Yeah, no, that's
slide-
right. No, that's right. Okay,
That's
is right.
slide 7.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, it's slide 7. Okay, it's.
And I'll try to make it as large as I can. So
Yeah, no,
folks,
that works. Okay, so Kathy McLeod is our actuary, and she's going to give a little background on this, but I'm going to make a real simple version of this. The FORA staff and board did all the right things for years to prepare for this. And that is, you basically got down to under the rules that apply normally to CalPERS members, your unfunded liability as of their last official report to you, which was June 30, 2018, was $144,000. Okay, so you kind of go, well, we're in good shape. You had a Section 115 trust, which is an irrevocable trust under federal law for paying retirees retirement benefits, and you had what, 6.9 million sitting in that against what appeared to be, at least as of a year and a half ago or almost 2 years ago, $150,000. So that's good. Well, here's the thing that gets a little tricky with a pension fund, and Kathy can take you into the deeper waters on this, but CalPERS, when it calculates what you owe to pay everybody's retirements through their death, assumes that you remain a member until all your employees are dead. Okay, putting it bluntly, that's how they work it. The reason why they make that assumption in the event that there's something like COVID-19 and the stock market crashes and all their investment assumptions get blown up and they still have all these retirees who are alive and out there, they want a go-to person to go back to collect money out of. And so they assume you remain a member of CalPERS. Okay, so that works just fine unless by state law you disappear on June 30, 2020. So that means that FORA is gone, and again, God forbid something happens in the future that blows up all of CalPERS's investment assumptions, or people start living to be 100 years old or whatever, they have no go-to person. They can't go back and collect any extra money from anybody. So what they do is that they give you a termination payment that is hyper conservative by certain rules. And FORA staff has prudently been in dialogue with CalPERS about what their termination payment might be. And, bottom line is, looking at this chart, it could be $10.5 million. Well, if you take your Section 115 and you augment it with some other cash that potentially is available, you end up with 8.4, you're light 2.1 million. Now, here's the other thing that gets really inconvenient and problematic. It's a technical thing. It's not a quant thing. CalPERS doesn't give you your final termination payment until 90 days after you've terminated. So if you've terminated on June 30, 2020, and you can't, pay any more money to CalPERS because, there's a world-changing event in the next 20 or 30 years, then you don't even know what you owe until 90 days after you can't pay it anymore. So, there's a number of things, as we all know, in Sacramento that don't make sense. Well, this is one of them. So we don't really find out what FORA's termination liability is until October 1, 2020. So if you're one of the FORA stakeholders, and you're concerned about lingering liabilities, yeah, this is actually, this is a lingering liability. And it doesn't get resolved until 90 days after it. You might say it's too late to resolve it. So what to do? What we have proposed is that you can carve out a portion of your bond issue to be a reserve for the CalPERS termination payment. You estimate that reserve conservatively, which is why Kathy's on the call. And when you finally get the number on October 1st, hopefully the amount we have set aside is way too much, way more than what CalPERS needs. We pay CalPERS, and the unspent money in the escrow goes out back to the allocation percentages that the board has approved and gets reallocated to the 6 stakeholders by whatever formula has been specified by the board. And you see an example of that in this slide, which hopefully you can all see because Josh is screen sharing. I arbitrarily pulled a number out of the air to say that, well, if we think it's 2 million now, we'll set aside 5 million, and hopefully we'll have a $2.9 million cushion, which gets released back to the funding agreement members on October 1. So that's the story. I pulled the $5 million number out of the air, but the person, well, I would say this is very important to come up with a good conservative estimate as to what the termination payment for CalPERS is going to be. And Kathy, you're hopefully hearing all this, and you can add some important detail to what I just covered.
Okay, thanks for having me on the call. First of all, I think Mark did a great job of summarizing the issue. If you are, this 90-day delay after the termination date of the CalPERS pension contract is usually not an issue for an ongoing agency. They're going to be around. They just want to end their contract with CalPERS for pension services. But if you're an agency that's terminating operation, that 90-day delay is ridiculous. But nonetheless, that's the rule. In between now and then, the two sides of the equation that can change, and unfortunately, given right now, very much are likely to change, are the discount rate used to calculate the liability and the value of the assets. So I'll just take just a minute to explain that. So the liability side of the equation, CalPERS, excuse me, takes all of the expected future benefit payments it anticipates making on behalf of your current retirees and current active or terminated employees in the event they retire in the future. So it takes all those projected payments in the future based on their assumptions about longevity and cost of living increases on the benefits and that kind of thing. And it takes each future benefit payment for each person and discounts that back to the planned termination date using this discount rate. Well, as Mark explained, on an ongoing basis, that discount rate was 7%. So it was a pretty steep discounting, making your liability, manageable and only $100,000 to $150,000 short of your assets a year or two ago. But when they want to protect themselves from the fact that that CalPERS will now bear all of the risk of changes in the market and retiree longevity and all those things, as he said, they use hyper-conservative assumptions, and they're now going to change that discount rate from, say, 7% or 6.75 down to essentially a risk-free rate, a treasury rate. And so it's going from 7% down to what most recently, I think they told you was 1.2. Is that correct, Mark? I think that was the most recent illustration they provided. That's a huge difference. And that's where that big gap, that's where they sucked up all that extra money you had, was from changing that discount rate from 7% down to 1.2. So one of the questions is, between now and June 30th, how is that discount rate going to change further? Well, in normal times, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, we would have said probably not too much. In fact, it wouldn't have been 1.2. It probably would have been floating somewhere between 3 and 3.5%. But in today's world, who knows what's going to happen? Hopefully we won't go to negative discount rates, but certainly the bottom that we would expect would be 0. So what we had planned to do was a series of different tests to see how would the liability change if it went from, say, 0 up to maybe 1.5%. We don't really expect a huge rebound between now and June. We could maybe go to a top of 2%, but I don't see any point in us doing anything more optimistic than 2%. So we're going to try and do some illustrations at a variety of discount rates between 0 and 2% and keep our eyes on it and help you make the best guess you can about the discount rate side of the equation. And then the second aspect of it is we compare that liability based on that range of discount rates. We're going to then compare that to what we think the assets are going to be on June 30, 2020. And that's going to be completely dependent on the gain or loss in investment returns between last June and this coming June. And that too is a huge, unstable question. We already know that assets have fallen substantially in March, continue to sort of fall in April, but less so. The question is, are they going to rebound with any kind of reopening of things by June or not? And if so, how much? So you've now got an equation where both the liability side and the asset side are very destabilized. So we can't offer you we can't offer insight about those things. We'll probably turn to Mark and others about what feel like the best assumptions to make about that. But based on their input about those assumptions, we can try and recalculate the liability and recalculate the unfunded portion based on what we kind of agree as a group seems like the best set of assumptions. So that's where we come in.
Thank you, Kathy. So your consultants have made their reports. There's a lot to take in. So I'm going to toss it back to Josh.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kathy. And I think at this point, because this is an information item, you've heard what the circumstances are and what our approach is to bringing back some actionable material for you, and we'd welcome any comments and questions you might have.
Thank you, Josh. Any board members want to ask any questions at this point? I see Cynthia Garfield has raised her hand. Please go ahead.
You're on mute, Cynthia. Don't get too far into it there.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for the heads up. So CalPERS, my understanding is that they normally readjust their discount rate in November. Are you sort of saying that this is a special circumstance? They're going from their promised lofty rate to now a risk-free rate?
Bingo. You got it. Because you're being punished in that sense. From their perspective, they're saying, well, look, world-changing events, life expectancy, stock market, COVID-19, whatever, God willing, former FORA employees have long, healthy lives. So we've got all this exposure to keep paying them money. And you aren't around if a world-changing event takes place in 10, 15, 30 years, whatever, to go back to and put more money in. So we have to take, just, you said, a risk-free, yield on the investments, and you end up with this big, ugly number. So Kathy, that's not the way an actuary I think would explain it, but I think it's...
No, that's actually exactly what I would say. And the unfortunate part is that you're buying in this risk-free rate at the bottom of the market. So you're buying at the most costly time that we could have imagined in the last 20 years. And unless this is a road that you want to no longer go down, the only solution is just to be ready for the dollar amount.
And a follow-up question is that, and there's no mechanism for, gee, if they guess too conservatively, we get a prize in 30 years?
Yeah, no, that's a, yeah, no, that's what you get. If you, some agencies will choose to say, you know, we're not willing to pay that price. That's a ridiculous price. We don't think things will ever be that bad. So we're just going to self-insure that risk. We're going to find another agency like the county to take over the liability, set up a slush fund to make those contributions on an ongoing basis. And then eventually when people retire or the situation, the liability is small enough that they can afford to really pay the remaining termination liability at a risk-free rate, then they'll terminate it at that point, maybe 5 years or 10 years in the future. But if you really just want to get out of it now, there's no recouping. Oh gosh, 20 years down the line, it turns out that that was ridiculous and our ultimate real liability was half of what we paid them. No, you don't get the money back. CalPERS just uses it to reduce the liability for everybody else.
Oh, thank you for the explanation.
Thank you. Jon Wizard has his hand up. You're next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. That was a very interesting comment I heard at the end, and while I appreciate that all of us as public entities are hesitant to take on liabilities, you know, if we can wait out this sort of sharp decrease in projections, revenue projections, and the ability of PERS to pay, you know, if we could save $5 or $10 million by waiting 5 or 10 years, that seems like a thing we should be exploring, which I understand is given our limited amount of time, but nevertheless, that's not anything to shake a stick at. The other thing I'd ask is, which is maybe more for FORA staff, and I beg your pardon, I didn't look closely enough to see if Helen was on the call, but what would it be, or rather, has staff already contemplated, or would it be something that we could dig into to see if it was feasible to hold on to the 115 trust until such time that the bill from PERS showed up? Because if we're generating interest at a higher rate through the 115 trust than we might otherwise, I don't understand why we would pull the cord on that early when we have trustworthy municipal partners that could write a check in FORA's name, and or LAFCO could do that, sort of holding that account in escrow.
Helen is on the call, so if you're looking for a response directly.
So CalPERS, the only provision CalPERS has for delayed payment is a 5-year plan. And with that 5-year plan, we're going to have a conversation with CalPERS on Monday, and to find out what the terms on those are, whether it has to be paid on an equal installment over the 5 years. Definitely, we can keep the money as long as we possibly can in PARS in the 115 trust. And right now, the only reason we haven't lost money on our investment is because we are in a fixed income investment. We went the moderate, more moderate and conservative way, and tried to maximize the amount of interest we were going to get in the year, little over a year span that we have. And currently right now, we reinvested that for another 90 days because the earliest that we were told we would get that final number would be sometime in October. So it all depends. I mean, whether CalPERS will still allow us to do the 5-year payment, or will they demand a full and final settlement on, when they send the termination. So like I said, I don't have the answers right now for that. The answer will lie definitely posing it to CalPERS at the moment, and we'll let the board know as soon as we get a definitive answer.
Thank you.
if I might, and I would, maybe this is a question for Mark and Kathy, but how would addressing the CalPERS issue in this way, would that have any bearing on the bond issue? Does the CalPERS question have to be handled explicitly beforehand, or can we go on a deferred payment plan and that would be sufficient?
Well, I won't answer on the deferred payment plan. I think that's a possibility, but let me tell you why we need to affirmatively, one way or another, address CalPERS. As I think people on the call know, we've had 3 California cities that filed for bankruptcy in the last few years: Vallejo, then Stockton, and San Bernardino. In all 3 cases, CalPERS intervened, in the court with expensive lawyers. And one of the things that came really clear is, if push came to shove, certainly in San Bernardino and Stockton, CalPERS went after the bond investors, went after their bonds, and just said, we come before bonds. We get paid first. And the bankruptcy courts in Stockton and San Bernardino basically agreed with them. I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer or any kind of lawyer, but the bond market really just kind of reeled from that CalPERS would intervene, go after bond investors, and apparently successfully argued that CalPERS is in first position over anybody else in a municipal bankruptcy. So with that type of history hanging over us, we really don't want to, we can disclose lots of things about, risk on assessed valuation and new development and all of this, but we don't want to disclose that we have an unresolved issue with CalPERS and they might come back and take us to court and grab the bond investors' money.
Makes sense. Gail Morton has her hand up, and then Cynthia Garfield.
So the question that I have is to Helen, perhaps, is when we did our mid-year budget, we projected that we would have $1.8 million of unallocated funds in the budget at the end of June 30th, 2020. And my question is it feasible to take some amount of that, let's say $1 million, and as done on the slide here where we put 1.5 million from FORA fund balance transferred to the 115 trust, is it feasible for us to put additional unallocated funds into this trust balance to protect it and reduce what's coming from the bond? Is that something that is within the discretion of this board and an action that might come back to us in May?
Yes, definitely the ability to put more money into the Section 115 trust, specifically the 1.5 million that's already been approved by the board as a reserve funds. If we put that in, then right there you have an additional 3 months of interest that you can possibly get, which would probably be around $20,000-$30,000 more. So we're roughly getting about currently about $10,000 to $15,000 of interest a month net of fees on the Section 115. So anything that we put in there will definitely help. So the key question that I'm trying to say is, in addition to that 1.5 million that you're setting aside, you're saying there's a deficit in this calculation. I'm looking at the slide that Mark put it up. It's still on the screen. Is that we're still trying to look at our uncovered shortfall of 2.1 million. But if we set aside another 1 million from our unallocated general fund based on this budget and move that into this trust fund currently, that now we're looking at what is the cost of 1.1 million, and the discount rate is of the 1.2% is on a much smaller sum. And that's where I'm trying to say, where does the optimal point come from taking our current assets without touching the bond, which is so necessary for the development of the former Fort Ord?
and asking, is that feasible? Can that come in front of the FORA board?
I mean, definitely that's feasible, and I'd have to defer to Josh on part of that. The issue is that we also have litigation. I'm not sure what has been settled, so the amount of that 1.8 has now been reduced. And then you also have $3.4 million of asks from various jurisdictions on that $1.8 million.
So all of those things are the things that are the considerations, but as Mark, I think it was Mark that just explained, maybe it was bond counsel, is that in the bankruptcy court in those cases of Vallejo, Stockton, and San Bernardino, that CalPERS was treated as a priority claim, and they were able to go after the bond matters. So if we're acknowledging that the CalPERS is a priority, has some standard of priority under these cases, I'm trying to make that CalPERS obligation gets satisfied from our general funds, primarily to the extent we can, while we're still in existence. So I'm getting hot and cold there on that issue, depending on who's talked. But the reason also, Mark, you use these words, that we can carve out from our bond money for the satisfaction of this obligation. And the question that I have is that we filed a validation action where the language in the validation action specifically articulates that the proceeds will be expended towards the remediation of the remaining blighted property on the former Fort Ord military base. And it lists what those properties are, and it says the background is remediation of blight is in the best interest of the county, and if bonds are issued, it's going to remediate this blight. My question is, when you had a remediation action that articulated and incorporated a prior resolution that the bond proceeds are to be used for blight removal, how can we as a board now make a change and say we're going to use them for any other purpose?
So Paul Timmick, our bond counsel, is aware of that. So I'm going to pretend to be Paul momentarily, but Board Member Morton, what I really need to do is have Paul get back in touch with you on that. But let me give you my estimate of his answer. I asked him the same question, and this is the answer he gave me. That the issue that was really validated, that is the core issue, is your right to receive tax increment and spend it on the bond issue. And there is, that was validated. And so you can say, well, yeah, we aren't spending it on remediation, okay? Paul and his partner and other people in the legal community have found that there is an independent authorization for CalPERS members to issue what are called pension obligation bonds to go satisfy CalPERS. And so putting those two things together, and again, this doesn't sound like a good legal answer, and I apologize. Paul couldn't be on the call, but we will get back to you. Paul essentially concluded that we can use, I'll call it this generic authorization, if you're a member of CalPERS, to go pay them. And in conjunction with the fact that the validation didn't go to the use of the proceeds, it went to the money to go pay the bond issue. So that's the best answer I can give you now, and I suggest I will get Paul to get back with you. If that works.
Okay, because the use is identified all over the complaint, and it's identified in the validation judgment. So I get that you aren't able to give us a legal opinion, but it's the detrimental reliance that I'm concerned about, in that nobody objected when they thought this was going for bond proceeds. Okay. So thank you.
Yeah, got it.
Chair, I know you have Cynthia up next. I just wanted to say that that Kendall probably has something to add after that. Okay.
Great, thank you. So Cynthia Garfield, go ahead, and then we'll hear from Kendall Flint.
Thank you. I really appreciate the thoughts on how to maximize the bond proceeds. I mean, this is taking it out of one pocket and putting it in another pocket is not a good idea. The bond should go, I think, to the maximum extent possible to the jurisdictions that are going to use it for its intended purpose. So how can we readjust things to more fully fund the CalPERS obligation, which is what we've all agreed we want to do to the greatest extent possible? So I liked what I heard about scraping every penny together and putting it either in reserve or in the Section 115 trust to be used at the end of June or whenever we have to actually pay. But I would point out that keeping anything aside to pay later doesn't make any difference, because the only thing you'd be gaining is interest earned, because the actual amount of the liability is determined June 30th. It doesn't matter whether we've paid it or not, or whether we have a 5-year plan for them. The only thing that would be different is our assets would be slightly larger, not much, but the amount owed, in best of my understanding, is determined June 30th and would never change. Is that correct, Helen?
That is correct.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm in favor of anything that maximizes that bottom line from $30,000 and increases it, because we've paid out other stuff, other monies to reduce our unfunded liability with CalPERS. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Kendall.
Okay, I just want to make sure the board is tracking on a couple things. One, you may recall we talked about the 2018 transition plan, and actually we've been looking at the updates to the 2020 plan. And there was language in the 2018 plan that's carried over that said the CalPERS liability would be paid or could be paid by future tax liability over a 5-year period. I think that went to something that Cynthia was talking about, the willingness of CalPERS to give you 5 years. Here's where it gets interesting. In the last couple of weeks, Bond Counsel has reviewed the transition plan and said, you know, that isn't exactly accurate now that we're doing bonds, right? In the 2018 timeframe, when that was being put together, there wasn't a bond on the table. Now there is. So here's the situation, whether we like it or not. Bottom line is that the bond can proceed, but what Mark is trying to explain here is that, look, regardless of the CalPERS liability, we cannot take any future tax increment as we thought in the transition plan outside of what's being allocated for the bond. So it has to be wrapped into the whole package with the bond. Now, to Member Morton and Garfield's points, the board can absolutely decide to allocate more funds of anything that's remaining to reduce that liability. But I want to remind you all that coming up in the May, and I think we're, Josh, correct me, I think we're going to do allocation in May once we hear everything out. But we're looking at also requests from the county to cover costs that relate to them taking over administrative functions, one of which would be to oversee that last payment and any other last payments that may be required post FORA sunset. That would include Seaside taking over the LRA and the costs associated with that. We've heard Member Oglesby and others talk about veterans and whether or not we want to allocate funds for those folks moving forward. So I think that the thing we all have to unfortunately wrap our heads around is, one, that number, we're not going to know that number from CalPERS, not on June 30th. We're going to know it about 3 months later when they come up with their final accounting. And that number would be given to the county, and they would pay that out in the trust funds that were allocated. And to Mark's point, if we have this set aside in the bond and it overestimated, then great, anything left over will go to the other agencies. You can still, as a board, when we come back in May, allocate more funds to reduce that liability. But that's a fundamental change I want to make sure everybody's clear on. We're updating the 2020 transition plan to reflect that new reality. And we're removing also sections that related to future debt. Because as we understand it from the bond counsel, and he's been really great about, getting on this as quickly as he saw it, we don't have that option anymore. Anything that is collected from sales tax, or I'm sorry, property tax revenue post FORA is going to bond, period. So anything else that we want to wrap into that has to go into that same package. It can't be separated out. And Mark, I'm just looking real quick. Is that accurate?
Repeat again. I was checking with Paul Timmick. I was sending him an email to respond to Gail. Sorry, my apologies. But
originally the thought was that we would have this, ability to, not all property tax revenues are encumbered by the bond. Some still go to other things. But in this case, CalPERS, any other debt liability, it has to be wrapped up in that bond. It cannot exist outside of that. There is no mechanism to negotiate a 5-year deal with future property tax revenues outside of the bond.
To our knowledge, no, we really can't get there. The way it would have to happen is that you would have to go to basically the 3 project area stakeholders, the successor agencies for the county, marina, and seaside, and they would have to enter into a separate agreement with CalPERS of some kind, pay it over time. Yeah. And I have a feeling that if we were all in a room, there'd be ripples going through the room based on what I just said.
Right. So I just want to reiterate again what we're talking about, which we don't have to agree on today, but what we're really talking about, it's the concept. It doesn't matter what the amount is, whether or not you choose to pay it down further, or it's this, $2 million that's going to come out of it doesn't matter what the amount is. The point is it'd be wrapped in the bond. And that if you as a board decided May, when you see all these other asks, that you want to allocate funds, that is your discretion. You can decide that you take everything and put it over to CalPERS, or you can decide to do some, none, or all. But that's where we're at in terms of the mental discussion of how this moves forward. There's no longer a plan that we can implement based on the legal opinion given by bond counsel that we can continue to collect property tax revenues and entertain in any type of pay down over 5 years with CalPERS.
Yeah. I don't know how we would do that other than what the rather outlandish, given what we know, scenario with the stakeholders kind of decide to enter into a separate agreement with CalPERS.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah,
it's not.
And that would be so quick to do.
Let me send my email off to Paul so I can make sure Gail gets a really good answer.
Thank you. I see John Gaglioti has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, what does this do to the assumptions we had around the 17 million ACP monies and some of these CIP allocations that have been, I guess, promised? Well, they've been promised out of the finance group.
John, are you asking whether or not that money is affected by this discussion?
No, is it on the table?
Yeah, exactly. Jane's
no.
assessment. Yeah, is all that on the table?
No, that's all as approved by the board in the budget. That's not up for discussion at this point.
Perfect.
Great. Good discussion. Not a happy. There, we thought we had it so well figured out with CalPERS. Oh well. Let's see. Any other board member questions before I go to the public? All right. Not seeing any board member hands, and of course you'll have another chance once I hear from the public. So I see Sherry Damon has her hand up. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board. Just a question. It is a very serious topic and disturbing development indeed. Who fact checks CalPERS in October when they do this actuarial analysis? I know that when we were reviewing the retirement projections for various employees, there were plenty of mistakes that were made in their assumptions and application. And so it seems like I'm not sure who watches them, so that we don't have this unfettered. It's already going to be bad enough we have a maybe 1%, 0%, negative percent rate, but if there's a mistake on top of that, it seems like it could be even worse.
So,
Thank you.
Can I answer?
Please.
So that's why Kathy is on this call, Kathy McLeod. We bring in our own actuary. She's been through this drill before with other public entities. And your question is totally spot on. What we do need to do, and I'm thinking out loud here, but we need to put a little money for her in the cost of issuance for the bonds to make sure that when we get the CalPERS number, Kathy already brought this issue up with me, that we can basically retain her to go fact check CalPERS and make sure they didn't blow it. So that's why she's here. Kathy, would you like to add something on that?
Just very briefly, I agree. What we're doing right now is to try and provide a range of possible unfunded liability numbers, in part to help either verify Mark's, $2.9 million off the cuff guess of additional funds, or to at least put a range around what we think that unfunded liability number will be on June 30, 2020. Then CalPERS, and that's the first job, and that's in short order. And then, as you say, ultimately, on or before 9/30/2020, they're going to come back with a final number. And if you would like us to step in and say, well, give us the data that you use to verify that, so we can make sure we agree that, and we would talk with Helen or whoever else in HR to make sure that the data that they used matched what we expected. That's kind of the last chance to say, okay, we agree that person seems like that should be the benefit.
And I think the difference would be that Helen is probably going to be gone, as is Josh, and the administrator is going to be Lane, who I don't see Lane still on the call. I see his boss, one of his bosses, Councilmember Morton, on it, but basically Gail is going to be, Lane would be the one who's going to be saying, we got the CalPERS number, Kathy sick, get on him.
Yeah, right, exactly. So we would take the data that we use to determine this first illustration or estimate for June 30, and then we compare that. In theory, there should be little, if any, changes in the data used, and so we would do our best to verify that and have CalPERS verify that that's the appropriate data before they give you the final number.
Great, thank you. We have another member of the public wishing to speak, and that's Doug Yount. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair Parker. Just a comment. I would assume that all funds and all policies of the FORA board that are discretionary adopted in the last probably 6 months may be on the table relative to funding any unknown and shortfalls or gaps that PERS likes to surprise people with. So I would think that many of the board members in their own jurisdictions have dealt with surprises from PERS over the years in a number of different ways. This is just another one for another public agency, and I would hope that the FORA board look at all resources of FORA that are available, particularly to protect the priority of building removal as a key priority relative to stimulating economic development and future development of Fort Ord. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? All right, I'll bring it back. I'll close public comment and bring it back to our board. This is an information item. I see Gail Morton has her hand up. Yes, go ahead.
So I just wanted to follow up to what you just discussed, Mark, about hiring Kathy McLeod's, I may be saying her name incorrectly, I apologize, Kathy, her firm that would do the actuarial true up and make sure the amount is correct. And your second sentence in that, which makes sense, the second sentence in that was that there's no Helen, there's no Josh, that would fall on the successor for the oversight of the bond, which is the city of Marina. And would the cost of that, including the cost of Ms. McLeod's contract, be considered an administrative contract fee that could come out of the bond proceeds? Or would FORA need to fund Kathy's expenditure prior to June 30th so she's in line, and then the City of Marina's expenditure is just part of the bond process? That's the question.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to do it is to put, I'll call it the true up expenses as well as other known admin after June 30 into the bond issue, into the, we call it cost of issuance. So it's funded. So I see Lane is on the call. And so, you know, Lane can call up Kathy and say, hey, I've got money sitting over with US Bank, the trustee, to pay you. We got the number from CalPERS. Check it out. Let's make sure it's right.
So to reiterate, that could come from the bond proceeds as part of the limited restricted cost for administration.
Yeah, that's I think is the best solution. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great. Good discussion. Thanks, everyone. Any other board members wanting to make a comment or ask a question before we move to the next item? I'm not seeing any hands, so we will move now to item 7C. This is capital improvement project transfers. This is also an informational item. And Mr. Metz, is this you?
Yeah, I'll set it up again. And just a note, you know, traditionally we would have the action items first, but both of these discussions inform the later action items. That's why we set it up the agenda this way. So in any event, yeah, this is primarily an update that the transfer of the funds approved by the board of the mid-year budget and the projects and documents associated with them is in process. There are these memoranda of agreements that are important in establishing lead agency status under CEQA that is part of this transaction. So I'll ask Christy Reimer, who's been our lead consultant on this whole effort. It's been a huge task, and I just want to give Christy props for the work that she has done, bringing all this together, working to close out various complex contracts that some of which were half or partially finished, and bring all this to light to get it done in time for everything. So Christy, do you want to just walk the board briefly through this item, again being an information item?
Sure, thank you. As you know, we the step that we took last month to get the board approval of the budget was a pretty critical one. So we've been working to develop or to transfer these projects. And the MOAs that we have been talking about with the underlying jurisdictions are really the focus of where where our efforts are right now. We started with the Stockade project and the City of Marina to use that as kind of almost our template. Then we've moved to the City of Seaside project, which is the repair of the eucalyptus roadway project. Then we will be working towards the MOA for Delray Oaks, because that one becomes a little bit more complex because it involves a contract transfer, as is the final one, which was a general fund contract transfer for the Oak Woodlands as requested by the county. So as the elements of what we've been working towards are identifying what information needs to be transferred, getting the lawyers between the underlying jurisdictions and FORA's lawyers together to talk through this. And as I stated, we've started with the first two, Marina and Seaside, and then we're jumping very, very quickly to Delray Oaks and Monterey County. Just as a quick update, we expect to have the MOA with Delray Oaks out in the next, I talked to John Giffen in the next, within the next week, and then to Monterey County shortly after that. So given the timing and how long we've been on this call, I'm happy to take any questions. The board report that I provided is pretty complete in terms of what is expected. Those numbers were established as we said, back in the mid-year budget approval. and nothing has changed with those numbers.
Thank you. Thanks for your update. Any board members with questions on this item? Okay, not seeing any hands coming up. Any members of the public with questions or comments on this item? Not seeing any hands, so thank you. Good to hear that things are moving along, and of course they always seem to take slightly longer than we think they're going to, but thank you for staying on it and keeping things moving. We'll move now to an action item. This is contract amendments for consultants.
Yeah, so as we're moving to the finish line here, there is an increasing task list, and we're lucky to have some existing contracts and talent to help us get it done. The board report outlines what the request is, and I'll just kind of step through them briefly. The first is our friends at NHA Advisors. As I mentioned before, Mark Northcross really has been incredibly competent and dexterous and flexible in handling, taking on the full scope of the complexity that the FORA endeavor and the pursuit of these bonds has brought, including making trips to Sacramento, bringing on key other assets that we need, and delivering multiple sets of analyses brought on by the demands of the validation action and the COVID-19 pandemic, among others. So his contract is a contingent contract on successful bond issuance, which was signed back in the summer of 2019 for an amount of $90,000. Given the additional tasks that he's had to take on, his request is for an additional 30, still contingent on successful bond issuance. And I can say that without his work and his team's work, we would be more close to where we are today on that item. So the next is with regards to the Don Chapin Company, and this is related to the closeout of the CIP work on Surplus 2, and the REI company, who was doing work in that area, left unfinished some work, and the scope of that is described in the punch list that's attached to the board report. And in order to get that done with within an existing contract, I think the ask is $42,250. That includes a small contingency amount. Finally, our good friends and competent team at RGS is also being asked to take on additional work. As you know, Kendall has been performing some very key strategic support of the work that I'm shouldering along with. She's been a key communicator with many of you, and so we have some additional ask on that. In addition, we'd need to bring on some kind of more focused planning support to process the consistency determination for the city of Seaside's campus town development and some potential other consistency determinations that are out there, as well as a new role for her team in facilitating and managing record transfers to the county, among other tasks. So we're looking for a total of $40,000 additional dollars to her contract. So the total request here on these three is $112,250, with $30,000 being contingent on successful bond issuance. And these funds would come from the unassigned funds that were identified in the last mid-year budget, the $1.8 million.
Thank you, Josh. Board member questions. I see Gail's hand is up. I want to just ask before I move to her, the Don Chapin contract. Are we going to recoup that money from REI? I mean, if this is work that they were supposed to do but didn't do, I hope this isn't extra money that somehow we're having to put out to complete their work.
This is John Giffen. This is definitely an issue that we are raising within the context of that dispute.
Okay, so we're all right.
It's a line item on there. We got it in our summary. It's
so
there.
we'll hope for the best, but meantime we want to get the work done, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Pretty much. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Gail Morton, your turn. Take it away.
So my question is, in the staff report for the stockade, not the stockade, but surplus 2, that it was a cap of $5.2 million. It wasn't a commitment from FORA funds for the totality of a job. Have we spent the full $5.2 million to date? Or is this 52,000, whatever the number is, within the scope of that $5.2 million?
Christy?
Josh, can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Member Morton. It is under the 5.2 million. Obviously, the exact numbers we don't know because of the potential litigation that's out there. But right now, this is, again, it's a not to exceed 42,500 on a T&M basis. And what it does do is it wraps up the site work so that we can do a project closeout, that we can close out the NPDES permit, and that we can actually transfer the project as far as we can with completion to the city of Seaside. So quick answer, yes, at this point, it's all under the 5.2 million. We're not doing an additional ask above the 5.2.
Thank you for that. And the next question is related to regional government services contract, that some of this 40,000 is for preparation of a consistency determination for the city of Seaside's campus town. And Josh, you mentioned other consistency determinations that are pending. If in fact we sunset on June 30th, 2020, we have 60 days until we sunset. Why are we doing consistency determinations?
So we respond to consistency determination packages that are brought to us as requested by the jurisdictions to comply with the rules that we operate under until June 30th. So that's the reason that we would look to do what our members are asking us for.
So the value of that, when as of June 30th, it's not necessary. Again, we're looking at trying to save as much money as we can to meet our PERS obligation. I'm still trying to figure out what is the value of that. Does it hold up a project in any way, as opposed to the Seaside project just sits there, June 30th, no consistency determination is necessary, they move forward?
That's really for the representatives from Seaside to address. I can just tell you that we want to support our jurisdictions in having the strongest foot forward in accomplishing the base reuse plan vision, and this is part of the vision. So we are doing that work as requested. And I would say if other of either Mr. Wizard or Mayor Oglesby wanted to weigh in on that.
I see that Mr. Oglesby has his hand up. Cynthia Garfield had her hand up first, but maybe we can go to Ian Oglesby.
It's the question I was going to ask anyway, so I'm interested in the answer for that.
Okay,
reason.
well,
thank you.
We'll jump right over then. So Mayor Oglesby.
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that question. That question is more to Josh and the legal team about if a consistency determination needs to be made, and you guys, FORA is still open, why wouldn't we send it over there, and why wouldn't you guys process it? You're open to June 30th, so it's not for the city to say that we won't send the documents over there. You know, that's too much of a sleight of hand for me. I want to do stuff right and proper. You guys are open to June 30th. We open to June 30th, and speaking for Campus Town, we knew that was coming, so I don't know why we hold that document. But you know, the board needs to tell the rest of the board members which actions you don't want to do before June 30th. You know, and maybe we won't try to process some stuff. And then my second point, or my closing out point, is if FORA has not spent the $5.2 million that they're obligated towards surplus to, then we want an accounting of all that money, and we want that money to flow to us also. So let's keep track of that money. Thank the chair.
Thank you. Jon Wizard has his hand up, so why don't we hear from him, and then Kendall Flint, and then Cynthia Garfield.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And just to support just a very brief question to Josh or John. Do I understand correctly that the base reuse plan requires land use jurisdictions to submit consistency determination documents when they do land development?
The master, yes, and so does the master resolution.
Oh, okay. So if it's required, that's why we did it. We don't have the authority to ignore the documents that control FORA's operation. And if FORA, by virtue of limited staff and time, is unable to complete that request, then that's FORA's issue to take up. If we ignore the contract we're bound by, that's our issue. So we're going to do what's required of us until it's not required anymore, unless it's a moral or ethical obligation, and then we'll continue doing it.
Thank you. Kendall Flint, and then Cynthia Garfield.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple things. One, as it pertains to law in California, when you have an application, the FORA has an obligation in order to process that. But I just want to be clear, and John, please correct me if I am wrong, but we've actually reached out and talked about this internally, because frankly, as of July 1st, no consistency determinations are required further. Once FORA is gone, right, there's no requirement to have a consistent. But our understanding in talking with Seaside's counsel is that the applicant wants to have the consistency determination, and that is their right to do so, which is why they're continuing the process along. Could they do it post-FORA without the consistency determination? Probably. In fact, they wouldn't have to have one because, again, once FORA is sunsetted, there's no reason to have that. The plan at this point is that if the applicant has a complete application, which has not been received at this point, but we anticipate it coming soon, that we would be able to process that within the next 30 days and then bring that forward to the board for consideration at your June board meeting. But it is absolutely the right of the applicant to request that, and it is FORA's responsibility by law to process that if they submit an application in a timely manner.
Thank you. Cynthia Garfield.
You need to unmute.
Okay, start off with, we have been extraordinarily fortunate in the consultants that have been working with us. This is the work that people have done has been extraordinary and gotten us so far. I'm not sure how many FORA staff still exist, but I think you can count them on one hand.
Yeah, there's about, well, it depends. Eska's part of our team, that's 7.
I don't need my toes in any case. Yeah. So it's really, and there's an amazing amount of work to be done. I don't begrudge any payment to any of these consultants. So I want to make real clear, but I would ask, my intended question was, if someone from Seaside could please let me know what the advantages or disadvantages would be for postponing their request of this to keep funds used for things that do need to be done rather than things that won't need to be done starting July 1st. And so that was my question to the folks in Seaside, because if it is without disadvantaging Seaside possible for us to give them feedback that we won't be doing a consistency determination, I would move that we table that issue.
Thank you.
So Seaside?
Gail Morton has her hand up, and then let's hear from Mayor Oglesby, who also has his hand up.
So I didn't know if somebody was going to answer Ms. Garfield's question, but my question then to RGS Representative Kendall is, what difference in the amount of fees if that additional work is not being undertaken?
I'd put it somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000. I mean, it's in that range. We're also talking about taking on some transition tasks that relate to finance, helping Helen move things over to the county. But as far as consistency determination, we anticipated that somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000.
Okay, and if in fact it came forward and the FORA board found the project was not consistent, so we had the staff went through it, your staff, now in place of FORA staff, and said, we've determined it's not consistent. That happens June 15th or whatever imaginary date. What ability does anybody have come June 30th, July 1, to enforce a change to make it consistent? That's a rhetorical question, but I want you to answer it.
No, I will. It's not consistent with the base reuse plan, and that means it's not consistent overall. However, the anticipation is that this would be consistent with, I'm not saying it is or is not, but I'm saying that the idea is that it would be. But the thing is that as of July 1st, if it was not, then Seaside would simply have to review their environmental process, right, and amend whatever they needed to do as a jurisdiction to allow for whatever the inconsistencies were, which any jurisdiction can do post-FORA, right? So if you're using the base reuse plan to justify whether it's a specific plan or a master plan or any pieces, you can absolutely do something else post-FORA. So if it's considered to be inconsistent, then it would follow the city of Seaside to make a determination whether they wanted to amend or adjust their general plan to make it consistent with that, and then they would take that on as their own jurisdiction. The way I understand it is that, if it is found to be consistent with the base reuse plan and it meets that criteria, it probably allows the developer to move a little bit faster through the process because they don't have to wait for these other things to happen. So we're talking about perhaps a timing issue, but we did RGS, we raised that question with Josh and with others and said, we're happy to do it, but do you need to do that at this time? And, again, that's the right of the developer who's moving forward with this. Project's been on the books for some time. And I think, I don't want to speak for them, but my sense is that they just really would like to wrap this up before FORA goes away. I don't want to speak for them. That's just what we've been kind of led to believe from conversations with staff.
Thank you. Mr. Oglesby, your turn.
I'm not sure how we got down this rabbit hole of this question. What was Seaside supposed to do? Wait out the time frame? We're required to push forward this project and ask you guys to determine it's consistent, which we believe is consistent. That shouldn't be a hard thing to talk about when we talk about redevelopment on the former Fort Ord. But when you guys start talking about, I start hearing people talk about, well, is it worth the cost while we wind it down because we want to pay other things? Then we need to just start from the top and vote about what we want to spend on and not spend on, because there's no way you could tell me now that it's a possibility that the board thinks $10,000 to $12,000 for this consistency could be better used for something else. We just need to gather everything we've been doing and re-vote on our whole budget and go down the line on that way. This is a normal course of business, and it wasn't for us to say we're 9 days out, so let's not put it in front of the board, because again, like I said, to me, that's playing fast and loose. So it is a benefit to have FORA board weigh in and deem this consistent, but I thought it was a little bit unethical for Seaside to say, let's wait out the FORA board, and for anyone within FORA to say, well, Seaside, should you wait it out because we want to save the $10,000? I don't understand why would we be playing those games behind the scene. And I value the questions, but I just, now is not the time to try to go through the budget and say, let's save every dime we can so we have less money taken away from the bonds, because there's other areas that we can save money, and that's not coming up. So let's not bring it up when we're talking about Seaside and finishing up this determination. So thank the chair.
Thank you. Jon Wizard, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank and agree with the mayor's comments. You know, we have a limited amount of time left at FORA, and I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that there is a lot of important work to do. It is normal and proper to bring consistency analyses to the FORA board for their consideration. And while we are already being notified of CEQA actions against this project, we are not necessarily inclined to give that litigant another route of attack by accusing us of dodging the normal and proper course of a consistency analysis. So we're going to follow the rule book and do what we're supposed to do. And once that rule book, once that's closed and that's no longer the field in which we're operating, you know, we will make that adjustment at that time. But while it is the next natural step to do that, we're not going to get cute and try to avoid an obligation that we have. To the mayor's other point about the cost, you know, I as an individual cannot encumber any of the finances of the city of Seaside, but I would be surprised to hear that there was not support from my colleagues to pay that 10 to 12,000, so long as all the other people who have had consistency analyses will pay for theirs historically. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from the public now. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this item? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so we'll bring it back to this board. Mr. Haffa.
I would like to move approval of the item as recommended by staff.
Mayor Carbone would like to second approval.
Great. Motion by Haffa, second by Carbone. Any further discussion by the board? All right, seeing no hands going up, Mr. Turgenza, would you do a roll call vote for us?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell. He told me he was having issues with his iPad, so he may no longer be on. Councilmember Alan Haffa.
Aye.
Councilmember Jon Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter. Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gaglioti.
Aye. You hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Pro Tem Gail Morton.
While I disagree in principle, I will support this because it's going to come back for a second vote. I don't want that to happen, so aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll move now to a request from LAFCO for payment of processing fees.
Yeah. Let's see. Am I on the? Hold on. Okay, I'm not on mute. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so this is another item that was not budgeted for, although there was direction provided in the 2018 transition plan to to accommodate all processing fees for the transition with LAFCO. We wanted the board to be aware that there would be additional funds needed for doing this process. So there's a invoice attached in the board report. There's a $10,000 additional amount requested by LAFCO. And that's pretty much what we have. I guess the reference is the 2018 FORA transition plan. Page 14 has the direction to the executive officer to submit the transition plan to LAFCO and execute all LAFCO required documents and pay all LAFCO required processing fees. So this is in there. This would be an additional 10,000 out of the budget, unassigned funds, and that's the item.
Thank you. Any questions from board members on this item? Not seeing any hands. Are there any members of the public who would wish to speak to this item? I'm not seeing any hands go up, so I'll bring it back to this board. What is the Cynthia Garfield? Yes, please.
Just a quick question of, so we've given them LAFCO a $10,000 deposit. And so I'm not sure how that was determined, what was that supposed to be used for? I'm not saying that they did this, but we don't have any oversight into how they spend their money or how this invoice was created. So they could tell us that they paid 1 hour of legal time for $9,000 an hour and need more money. I'm just wondering what the interactive process is for understanding how they're spending this funds and whether we've underestimated the deposit or whether that was a reasonable amount for the purpose at hand. And I would look to Josh for some information on that.
Yeah, I can, while we do have our fine colleague, Mr. Jonathan Brinkman on the call here, and I'm sure he's happy to speak to this, I will say that he has provided to us a detailed breakdown of the time that he and his colleagues have spent staying in tune with the FORA process and attending our meetings and handling hearings and so forth. And as many of you know who are LAFCO board members, you know, LAFCO operates on a fee kind of recovery basis. So all special districts who come to LAFCO for different actions are paying their own way, so to speak. So while we did not include, unless it's in here, let me just double check, the details in the board report, it was provided to staff. And so that was apologies on my behalf for not including that in there.
Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to know. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. I would entertain a motion to authorize the payment to LAFCO. Anyone?
Oglesby moved that payment.
Second, Garfield.
Thank you. Motion by Oglesby, second by Garfield. Any further discussion by the board? Seeing no hands going up, Mr. Tregenza, would you do a roll call vote for us?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell. Councilmember Alan Haffa.
Aye.
Councilmember Jon Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter. Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gaglioti.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Yes.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll move now to the item that we added to the agenda, and that is the proclamation honoring Edith Johnson. Josh, can you put that up on
Sure.
the screen for us so that people know what they might be approving?
Yeah, give me just a moment here. I'll pull that up. This came together rather quickly, and I will say with the able and willing support of your retired executive officer lending his well-tuned hand for this kind of thing. So we had lots of engagement from the veterans community as well, and this is recognizing Edith's many contributions to the endeavor that we're engaged in here and other activities over the many years.
So what I would propose is maybe, Josh, if you could just scroll through this fairly slowly so people can kind of get an idea of what the whereases say. I would entertain a motion to, once you've had a chance to read it, entertain a motion to approve this. And then I would like to, we were going to have Frank O'Connell read it, but he has not been able to remain with us. So perhaps I'll go ahead and read it then, and then ask anyone who would like to speak to their experience with Supervisor Johnson or Mayor Johnson or Veterans Affairs Committee member Johnson, however you, or community member Johnson, however you happen to know her, MPC instructor, however you knew her.
I'd move approval.
Thank you. Motion by Phillips. Is there a second?
I'll second. Carbone.
Thank you. Second by Carbone. Any discussion at this point?
Yes. Can I say something, Madam Supervisor?
Yes. Is it on the motion? What I'd like to do is
Yes,
get this adopted, and then we'll have you speak immediately after, if that's all right.
Well, no, it's on the motion. Well,
certainly. Go
it's
ahead.
up to you, Chair. Whatever you want to do.
Go ahead.
No, I think we should highlight Edith being the first county supervisor, 4th District. You know, I think that's important.
The first 4th District supervisor?
Yes.
So add that in. Is that what you would like?
Yeah, I think that's the proper place in history, and we need to signify that.
I'm just wondering if that's true. I think we've had 5 supervisors in Monterey County for quite a long time.
No. For the 4th District?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I may be wrong then. Okay. All right. So that's
All
why
right.
I asked you guys. All right.
Oh, wait.
No,
I see.
Michael's saying, what's Michael saying there?
All right, let's get
Edith
our
was
expert.
not the first 4th District supervisor, but
Okay.
she clearly was. I think Supervisor Phillips knows a lot about this because he swore her in as supervisor back in 1998. But she was definitely one of a leader in Fort Ord, and she was the very first chair of the legislative committee and was the big advocate in Washington, D.C. for sure.
Great. Let's vote on the motion, and then actually maybe Supervisor Phillips, you would read the proclamation for us. I think that would be appropriate. So we do have a motion. We have a second. And Mr. Tregenza, if you would lead us through a roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Haffa,
Aye.
Councilmember Jon Wizard,
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Councilmember John Gaglioti,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Aye.
Mayor Mary Ann Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. And so Supervisor Phillips, if you'd be willing to read this for us, and then I want to open it up to board members and members of the public to remember Supervisor Johnson.
Surely, and thank you for that opportunity. Make sure you scroll it for me because
Sure, I'll do that.
But I do remember swearing her in, and I worked with her for a number of years. And as I mentioned on the board one time, when we started the youth center, I didn't think it was going to cost very much, and it busted the county's budget on that. She never, the last time I saw her, she didn't let me forget it. But she was a very astute and just really a grand lady. So, whereas after achievement-filled lifetime of family, public, and educational services, Edith, is it Vallow Johnson departed this life peacefully at home on April 28th, 2020. And whereas Edith Johnson served the Monterey region in many leadership positions, including the City of Marina Mayor, Monterey County 4th District Supervisor, and Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board Director members for more than 10 years. And whereas Mrs. Johnson served 4 years as the FORA Legislative Committee Chair, 2 terms as the Chair of the FORA Board, providing instrumental guidance in the drafting and implementation of the Fort Ord-based Reuse Authority U.S. Army Economic Development Conveyance Agreement and Capital Improvement Program. And whereas Edith led 5 FORA legislative missions to Washington, D.C., working diligently with federal legislative leadership to correct inequities that hindered North Monterey County recovery from Fort Ord closure. And whereas Edith Johnson served 6 years on the FORA Veterans Issue Advisory Committee, really working diligently with national, state legislative, and appointed leadership, and successfully advocating for certain of the California Central, or for creation of the California Central Coast Veterans Cemetery. And whereas Edith Johnson demonstrated expertise with military base reuse efforts, which coupled with her leadership resulted in significant strides in Fort Ord recovery for the City of Marina, the 4th District Supervisor District, the Central Coast Federal Community, and the Monterey Bay Regional Citizenry. And whereas Judith Johnson never met a meeting she couldn't facilitate, a motion she couldn't fashion, or a sweeping compromise action that was too tough. And whereas Edith sustained her college professorship and family commitment while supporting her husband, Major Fred Johnson's decorated U.S. Army career, and whereas Edith Johnson steadfastly maintained her sense of fairness and equality throughout her personal and professional life until her passing. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board extends best wishes and condolences to the full Johnson family and adopts this proclamation expressing its sincerest appreciation for Edith Johnson's extraordinary contributions and exemplary commitment to the reuse for the reuse of the former Fort Ord and to well-being of the whole Monterey Bay region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And that's a mouthful. So I'll start with FORA board members. If any of you would like to say a few words about Edith Johnson and how you knew her, please raise your hand in the Zoom function, and then we'll go to the public. Okay, I think perhaps Michael Hulamard said it all. All right, Mayor Oglesby, yes, please.
I'm sorry, Chair. I just wanted to say she was a wonderful lady and a wonderful leader, as you guys all know. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to work with her when she was the supervisor, but I knew of her and the work that you guys were doing at the at the Board of Supervisors when I was in the military and watching you guys as I was in the military and doing my other job before I became involved with the government services. So I just want to say, you know, she's a wonderful lady and she will be missed. And up until, I believe, maybe, I don't know, 2 weeks before her passing, she was still participating with the Veterans Affairs Committee. You know, she missed the last meeting, but, you know, 8 days before then, you know, she was doing and helping us out. So I just want to say she worked in her community until her last days. And I just want to make sure that's on the record. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Chair, if I could add a note or two.
Yes, just a moment, Michael. Marianne Carbone has her hand up, and then I'll call on you.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I've been, you know, in an elected official for a while, and Edith was a wonderful mentor and really involved in the community in the Monterey Peninsula. She was just a great mentor, wonderful leader, wonderful woman. And I'd like to, you know, publicly thank her children for sharing her with us here, with the community. And I did talk to her children the other night. They're working, they said that their wish in lieu of flowers would be contributions, even though she's no longer with us, to Hospice of the Central Coast, but most also the Central Coast Veteran Cemetery that she loved very much. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Hulamard.
But just Chair and members of the board, like I said, almost everybody on this call probably knows a really wonderful person. And I must have gotten 30 phone calls from veterans around the state of California, everybody from Robert Norris in Southern California to folks in Washington, D.C. And just an extraordinary number of stories that people had about Edith and the very special person she was behind the scenes, giving people the kind of support and help. She also was extraordinarily active in the volunteer community and the Marina Community Foundation, the kind of work she did for Marina as a volunteer, not just as an elected official, was just fabulous. And the work she has continued to do all the way up until her death, volunteering at the Veterans Issues Advisory Committee, as Mayor Oglesby indicated, was very, very special. So I just wanted to share that. There's so many folks around the state, and I know Marianne knows this. I think some of her family intend to do some sort of a memorial after we get past coronavirus issues, maybe in a little while. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your remarks and for your work on the proclamation. It definitely had the Michael Hulamard fingerprints, so appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a couple other hands. There was Christy Reimer and Jason Cameron.
Okay, I see those hands too. I just wanted to see if there were any other board members that wanted to speak. No, it's fine. I think it is time to move to others. So Christy Reimer, well, why don't we hear from you first, and then we'll go to Jason Cameron.
Thank you. I just, as always, Michael, you captured it so well. And, you know, going back to the early days of FORA, it's kind of bittersweet to see that FORA sunsetting as Edith has too. But it was just amazing to watch her in the early days of FORA. You know, being able to bring consensus. And Michael, you are absolutely right. She could put a motion together that brought everybody together. And I've always looked up to her, and she will definitely be missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron, your turn.
Hi. For those that don't know me, my name is Jason Cameron. I'm the Military and Veterans Affairs Officer for the County of Monterey. And although my time with Edith has been short compared to many of you, it was very impactful. Her passion was undeniable. You felt it, and her sense of humor, for those that got to know her in that way, was great. She had a great way of articulating and really bringing forth the issues, but in a way that anybody would be able to absorb it and understand where she was coming from and the importance behind it. And she was just a fabulous lady. And it's definitely going to leave a hole in the military community and in this tremendous volunteer world that we have here. This county is like no other I have been in as far as the military community, veteran community, and volunteers within it. And there's definitely going to be a gap there that's not going to be able to be filled. So I just wanted to just publicly say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wanting to say a few words about Edith Johnson? Yes, Mr. Cheshire.
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing of this, and I'm rather upset over the whole deal. Edith meant quite a bit to me. She was a leader amongst leaders. I watched her whole political career, worked with her. Christie's right. She could bring the board to consensus on about any issue. I won't say that there was never a 2-vote action item over at FORA with her sitting at the chair, but she knew how to bring people together. And she's really going to be missed. I mean, she did so much and everything. She was just a great woman. She really was.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. Anyone else wishing to say anything at this point? Well, thank you very much for being willing to add this to our agenda and take some time remembering Supervisor Johnson. She's someone who I, of course, was aware of coming up, and now that I'm sitting in that 4th district supervisor seat, you know, especially in the early days, and actually during her time as supervisor, I consistently heard not just about her leadership in these elected positions and sitting on boards, but her involvement in the community and how much it was clear that she cared about all of the residents of District 4 and of the whole county. So yeah, it's hard to put into words what she meant to this community. So thank you, Michael Hulamard, for taking a good shot at it. Thanks everyone for taking that time. We'll move now to public comment on items not on today's agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to address this board on any items that were not on the agenda? I'm not seeing any hands being raised, so I think that, let's see, are there any items from members that you'd like to see on future FORA agendas besides the ones we know we have in waiting? All right, seeing no hands up and hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.